Hi, everyone. Welcome to the January 2019 session, first session of the year. And last year was amazing. We had a lot of sessions and we have a lot of connects with the wonderful speakers and wonderful audience. So just to start off, what Women in AppSec is all about, if someone is new to the community. So this session is in combination with the InfoSec girls and OWASP. So these two communities try and make sure that we have more women in application security and in information security. And not just women, but the girls who are middle-aged school, so that we can grow them, we can inform them what information security is all about. So in the past, we have sessions in colleges, we have sessions in schools, we have session on information security and application security in the conferences, and we are looking forward to many more connects in the future. Now, about today's speakers, we have Carrie Anton. She is one of the chapter leaders of OWASP, and she's also the project leader for OWASP Proactive Control. The next speaker we have is Saman Fatima. She's working on SIEM, security information and event management as a security analyst. And then the third speaker we have is Manali Arora. She's again a security analyst who's working on application security, Android security, or mobile security. Now I will pass it on to Kerry to take it further. Kerry, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Vandana, and thank you for everyone for being part of this session. So as part of this session, I'm going to present the OWASP Top 10 Proactive Controls, the security that all developers should use. Right. So a little bit about myself. My name is Katie Anton, and I come from a software development background. I am one of the project leaders for the OWASP Top 10 Proactive Controls. I'm also a chapter leader for OWASP Bristol, and I currently work as a principal application security consultant at Veracode. Now, the OWASP mission, the OWASP is an open. The OWASP stands for the Open Web Application Security Project and is a non-profit organization, is free and open for everyone to use. When it comes to the OWASP Top 10 Proactive Controls, these controls are intended are for developers by developers, and they are intended to provide awareness around building secure software from the start. The project leaders of the project of this project are Jim Manico, Jim Bird, and myself. But the project is the result of contribution to many other security people, like, for example, Chris Romeo, Dan Anderson, David Sybak, David Ferguson, Josh Grossman, Osama El-Nagar, and Rich Mitchell. And all of these people have actually helped to shape the latest version, the OWASP Top 10 Proactive Controls version 2018, which we have released last year. And these are the 10 most important controls that developers can use while writing their software. So let's start with the first one, define security requirements. And we should, it is important to include security into the software development cycle in each of these phases of the software development cycle. And we can start into the requirements phase using the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard, or for short, ASVS. And this document will guide you through the different levels of security suitable for your application. where it has 3 levels, and the level 1 is the baseline, is the minimum level every application should use. It has 82 controls, and every application should use these controls. The level 2, which contains 139 controls, is for those applications that, in case of a data breach, okay, it's going to be embarrassing. It will make a little bit of mess, and that will need a little bit of cleanup, but it's not going to be the end of the world. But level 3 is for those applications that really do care about security, and are those applications that are critical to the business, that in case of a data breach, well, there are going to be serious financial consequences. And for this type of application, we recommend to be verified at a level 3, which has 155 controls. And you can use this document also to write unit tests to verify that those requirements have been implemented, and you can write unit tests. And then you can use as well for functional integration by using it in Selenium in conjunction with OWASP ZAP, that then you can plug into your continuous integration pipeline. So the tests that can be derived from the HSTS then can be automated using ZAP, put into your continuous integration, and ensure that every time you have new code changes, you run a minimum set of tests to verify for security. The next control is about leverage security frameworks and libraries. And this is about actually bringing into your software libraries and software frameworks with security embedded in. After all, you don't want to write your own cryptographic library. You can use those libraries that have been designed and implemented by default with security features. But it's also important that once you bring in this library, it's important to ensure that you stay up to date. And if we have to summarize a short list of best practices, we should bring in frameworks and library from trusted sources that are actively maintained and updated frequently for security issues. You should have an inventory of all these components that are part of your software, and you should check if these have known vulnerabilities. And you can use for these tools like OWASP Dependency Check, which is another great tool from OWASP that is free to use, Retire.js, or other tools. And another thing that we need to take into account when bringing in these libraries into our own code is that we need to implement them in such a manner that we reduce the attack surface, and we encapsulate the libraries to expose only the required behavior into our own software. So it's important to actually ensure that these components are regularly checked, and if there is some issues or they have become obsolete, they should as well be removed. The next one is about the secure database. Now, and this is an example of a perfect email address, because many developers actually try to validate the input when storing data into the database. But in some cases, a valid input is actually prone to SQL injection. And this is a very good example where this email address is actually a valid email address. But however, it is unsafe for SQL. And in that, as a result, this can cause injection, even when it is actually added into the code just like that. So the protection for this is to parameterize the query. This is a way to tell the SQL parser, when it parses that SQL sent, that these are the variables that are passed into our query. And this is our query. So we separated the dynamic data from the actual SQL command. And because the actual defense happens at the parser level, this is the best way to defend against SQL injection. And a common one, which I choose to add here, a common mistake is that many developers out there, they actually use SQL commands that look like they have placeholders, like this example. However, then they just do a string replace, which means that the final query ends up a concatenated query, which has in one string both the SQL command and the dynamic data, which will lead to SQL injection, because the parser cannot differentiate between what's that input and what's that command. And I say, unfortunately, this one quite a bit into the code. So it is important to parameterize, but also we have to remember that in some cases, in some locations, the parameterization does not work. Like, for example, the table names. And that's where we actually have to validate the data, ideally using a wide list of values. Like, for example, you would have a list only of the tables that you would select from. So SQL injection, it is still important. It's still #1 in OWASP top 10 2017 risks. And the reason is still at #1, it is because if this vulnerability is in the software, then the impact is can lead to complete data loss. So it is important to defend from the code against this type of vulnerability, and to defend using as primary defense the query parameterization as a defense in the validation of input. The next one is about encoding and escaping data, and this is, in simple terms, is to actually convert from this angle bracket, which can trigger code execution when parsed through a browser, to something that is it doesn't trigger this code execution. It is not executed by the browsers anymore. However, it is important that when it comes to this encoding, it must be done according to the context where that dynamic data is. And here is a table where you can actually have the context and then what is the best defense for that context. So if your dynamic data is into an HTML body, then you'll do an HTML encode. However, if you are using dynamic data into JavaScript, then that's when you need to do a JavaScript hex encoding. If you are doing if you are using dynamic data into your get parameter, then you need to do a URL encoding and so on. So in order to accurately defend against cross-site scripting, which is what we are trying to protect our software against, we need to apply contextual encoding. And this can become quite complex. To do it by yourself as a developer, so the best for this is to actually use libraries that have been designed for this purpose. And in .NET, you can use the anti-cross-site scripting library, which is using a whitelist validation and has specific methods for different types of contexts where your dynamic data is used. And when it comes to the Java, you can use the OWASP Java Encoder project. This is a very small project. It has no dependencies. It is very easy to use to bring into your software, and is already and is continuously updated and maintained. They continuously do releases of this project. And this is an example of the various functions for the different context of depending of where the dynamic data is into your HTML document. So if we are to sum up, then it is important to understand that in order to have a good defense against cross-site scripting, we need to ensure that we apply the right method for the right location, depending on where that data is within the HTML document. And this type of vulnerability can be easily checked with automated tools like SAST or DAST. The next control is to validate the input. And when it comes to input validation, we should ensure that the data that comes into the software is validated for both syntactically and semantically before it is used further into that application. So when we mean to have a syntax validation, this is to ensure that the data is in the expected format. So for example, in an application, we can have a 4-digit account ID, and the application should check that the data entered by the user is exactly the 4 digits length and consists of number. When it comes to the semantic validation, this is about to ensure that data is within the acceptable range for that given application. This is tied in with your business logic. So if you have a date then that has a certain meaning as part of your application, then you should ensure that that date will be within the date range of the start date and must end before the end date. So that date is within the date range. So when it comes to the semantic validation, this would be part of your business logic, your business requirements. And this is where you would tie it in with, and you will check it for. Now, in some libraries, you can actually in some languages, you can actually bring in libraries to help you out with the validation. And here is just a list of the various libraries for Java, PHP, and Ruby on Rails that you can use to help you out with your validation. So what I would like now to do is to actually do a short recap of the controls that we have discussed by now. So we can actually, every time our application receives in data, and when I say data, I don't refer only to data from a user interface, but we also should consider as external data things like data from the database, data from configuration files. So every time we bring our software receives data from a wide range of sources, we should validate it. Anytime we store data into a database, you should use parameterized queries. For any output, we should contextually encode it. And if we bring in a new library, a package from an open source or from a vendor, it doesn't matter. Every time we should encapsulate it. We can use various software design patterns to achieve this. And we should encapsulate it in order to ensure that we expose into our own software only the functionality that we actually need for our software, and we don't expose unwanted behavior. This gives better controls for managing these libraries in the future. The next one is about implementing digital identity. And as part of this OWASP top 10 proactive controls, we have tied in with the NIST digital identity guidelines, which was just published previously. Now, when it comes to this control, the main question is what is the authentication? And this is about ensuring that the person who is trying to access that software is who they claim to be. And when it comes to this, we have identified 3 security levels. The first one is for the applications that contain no personal identifiable information, no PII. And in this case, there is no requirement to actually link the applicant to a real specific person. And when it comes to authentication, we just need to ensure to provide some assurance that the claimant is bound to the subscriber's account. Now, when it comes to the applications that contain self-declared personal identifiable information, we need in this case to identify for the identity to have some evidence that supports the real existence of that identity. And when it comes to the authentication, we should provide a high confidence for this type of applications that the claimant is bound to the subscriber's account. And the third level is for highly sensitive applications, applications that can contain data that can lead to financial losses, personal safety. For this type of applications, we need to provide a very high confidence that the claimant is bound to that subscriber's account. So let's go a little bit more in details for each of these levels. Like I said, the security level 1 is reserved for lower risks applications that do not contain personal identifiable information or any other private data. For this type of applications, only single-factor authentication is required, and this is typically through the use of a password. The question is, how do we actually manage passwords and store them? And here are some lists of best practices where we should not limit the characters or the length of the password, use a modern password policy scheme, hash the password with a SHA-512 or other strong hash to avoid the scenarios of very long passwords that can lead to truncation or denial of service. Then we should combine the credentials with a unique salt, and that should be unique per user. It's also important to use strong cryptographic algorithms. The type of key derivation algorithms, like, for example, Bcrypt, Scrypt, and password-based key derivation function 2, or the more recent Argon 2. And we should store the passwords. In the case of encryption, also using a good key management as an alternative. Now, when it comes to the password strength, we should not limit to the type of characters or the length of the characters. So there are probably many of you have seen that there are applications out there which actually don't allow certain characters. Why would anyone try to protect against like single quote, to not allow users to enter single quote? We should allow users to enter any characters that they want. So if they want single quote, let them enter single quote. If they want emoji, let them enter emojis. But we should also not allow common passwords, and this can be easily done nowadays because there are applications out there which already have lists of databases of passwords from the previous breaches. It's important to also use a modern password policy, and for this we can actually consider the suggestions of a password policy from the NIST, and these are to allow at least 8 characters as a minimum, or to check the password against a list of common passwords, Do not force the unnatural combination of special characters of those password applications, which ask you to necessarily have a single an exclamation mark or any other characters that they insist to have. Why should we have them? We should not have password hints. Don't use password questions. Not have mandatory expiration for the sake of it. And this is something that more and more organizations started to recommend. Why should you ask your customers to change the password after 30 days? Because the studies have shown that what they are actually doing, they are just changing one character or two the most. So it doesn't actually help that much with the password security. And another important one is that in the case of multi-factor, we should not use the SMS because this is a broken protocol and can be hijacked. And the token or the text sent via SMS can be intercepted by attackers if they really want it. And the last one is to allow our users all printable characters, including spaces, accept all Unicode characters, and let them use emojis if they really want to use these. Don't restrict your users to only a set list of characters. Another one is there are situations if the user enters too long passwords, you might have a denial of service, but also more particularly for the case of Encrypt, which automatically truncates long passwords to the 72 bytes. For these type of scenarios, what you want to do is to hash that password with a fast algorithm like SHA-512 to reduce these long passwords. Also very important is to use user credentials-specific salt. So for each user to have its specific salt. And it's important as well to have this salt with the high randomness, just to make it more difficult for the attacker. So the introduction of the salt, all it does is just make it more difficult for the attacker and increases the time for them to break passwords. When it comes to the actual algorithm use, it's important to use, for example, an adaptive KDF, like password-based key derivation function 2, Bcrypt, Scrypt, or the more recent Argon 2, which some applications have already started implementing this algorithm. And the OWASP cheat sheet has been recently updated for Java languages and for PHP, which already have available this algorithm. So if you want to know more about how you actually implement the Argon 2 into your own software, have a look at the OWASP cheat sheet for password storage. So if we are to recap what a basic password storage workflow would do, is we can apply a strong hash algorithm to protect against truncation. Then we add a credential-specific salt for each user that has a high level of randomness. And then we use a strong cryptographic algorithm, like, for example, a Bcrypt, and we can actually store as optional using an adaptive cache and a secret key. And all this it does is just making it as difficult as possible for the attacker when your database is leaked. Because sometimes the database will be leaked. Now, the second level, this is the level for high-risk applications that contain self-declared personal identifiable information or other type of information or personal information. And in this case, you should use a multi-factor authentication through secure protocols, HTTPS in simple terms. Now, when it comes to a multi-factor authentication, or MFA, what this means is any combination of something you know, like a password or a PIN, something you own, like a token, and something you are, biometrics. And it's important to, NIST actually recommends and insists that the biometrics is not a recognized factor, which means that you should not use that one by itself. You should always use it because it's only, you should only use this in conjunction with any other factor. So you can't use this one by itself, it's not secure enough. And also don't use SMS as a second factor authentication because it is not safe, and NIST actually has in draft and prepares to ban the SMS as second factor authentication just because it's not secure enough due to the protocols that the SMS is based on. The level 3 of security is for those applications that contain a high level of sensitive data, that contain to personal harm, financial losses, civil violations, and this requires the strongest level of authentication. And this can be achieved using being in a position of a hardware cryptographic authenticator. So this is for the level 3. Like in the case of RSA, but it's important that if you have that token, you don't point it to a webcam, like in this case, which I got it from the internet. So somebody got the secure token, but they thought that it's too difficult to use. So what they did is pointed a webcam to the token because he was afraid to lose it. Well, that's not the best use because it defeats all of this. Have the token and have it only yourself, don't post it to the World Wide Web. So if we are to recap the authentication levels, we have the level 1 for no personal identifiable information. And for this scenario, we should provide some assurance that the claimant is bound to that subscriber's account, and this can be done using a single factor authentication, which is usually the use of a password, but you should do it in a safe, secure manner, the storing of the password. When it comes to the self-asserted personal identifiable information, which is the level 2, for this type of applications, we must provide a high confidence that the claimant is bound to the subscriber's account, and this can be done using a two-factor authentication. And for those applications that contain highly sensitive data, those must provide a very high confidence that the claimant is bound to the subscriber's account, and this can be achieved using a two-factor authentication with a hardware token. So the claimant must be in the physical possession of a hardware token to provide this very high confidence. And if you want to read more, then you can have a further look at various resources. And here is a list of the various cheat sheets that you can find as part of the OWASP to learn more about this domain. So the next one is about the access controls. And when it comes to the access controls, now these are complex, design-heavy security controls. Very difficult to do them from the scratch. So one thing that you can do is to bring in libraries that have already been implemented with the best secure design principles for access controls. And one of these is the Apache Shiro. But here, one of the things that is important is when you bring in libraries, you should not use things like it has role, because this is, for example, this type of code, like every user has the role, it will be very difficult to upgrade, because if you have your user and then you want to add another role like admin or a reader, then you need to change the code every time. The other way you can do it is to have a permission-based type of role, which is just a way to say, has this user the permission to access this part of the software? And this is actually much easier to maintain in the long term, and that's why it is access permission-based access controls are the recommended way to implement it into your software. So when it comes to the access controls, it's better to bring in a library, a framework that has been designed, implemented with these access controls, with the secure design principle in place to ensure that you have a solid access controls mechanism. And you should verify for this using either unit testing or manual review to ensure that you have implemented a good access controls into your software. So they are difficult to implement, can easily go wrong. So we recommend to be highly careful about this. The control number 8 is about protecting the data. Protecting data both at rest and in transit. When it comes to data in transit, this can be achieved using HTTPS protocol, because this is, and now today everyone can use HTTPS, is not that much of an excuse. We have Let's Encrypt, which is actually free. And this protocol helps with confidentiality, integrity, and authenticity. Another thing that we can add to this is to have the strict transport security header. And this is a browser standard which ensures that once the connection has been made between the client and the server, from that point on, the connection will be done, the communication will be done only on a secure channel, only using the HTTPS protocol. And when it comes to data as storage, we should take into account that we have in place a solution for the key management, key storage, and cryptographic and the cryptographic process isolation. We have in place rules for confidentiality, integrity, and availability to ensure that our data is not changed. And it's important to ensure that your master key is actually generated from a good random source. And that can be more difficult than some would expect. And this is an example from, this is a real life example where somebody has had two files in a folder. One of them was named encrypted password, and as the title suggests, contained the encrypted password. The second one contained some entities which turned out to be seed salt iterations, and these were used in a conjunction with password-based derivation function to generate the encryption key. So this was basically the key that was then used with the with the password to generate the encrypted password. So it was not quite hard-coded password. It was not quite plain text password, but it was like we put everything and we left the key into the door for the attackers just to grab it and get our password. So this is an example of how not to do it. So we need to actually ensure that when we generate the key, we generate it using a high level of randomness. But then when that key is generated, that's the secret. And as a result, it should be treated as a secret and stored in a safe place. So when it comes to the cryptographic storage, there are a few things that we need to ensure. First is to use well-vetted cryptographic libraries, and that contain use strong cryptographic algorithm, like for example AES. Then when it comes to the keys that are used to generate the password, these are secrets, and as a result, we should use forms of secrets management to protect the application. And we should store these, like for example, in vaults, or a hardware HSM, hardware secure module. And we must stay away from grown key management solution, just like an example, like I've shown a few slides ahead. So use known solutions to manage these secrets and store them in a secure manner. So we have to admit that sometimes protecting sensitive data at rest and in transit, it's painful. It's difficult to do, but we need to do it to ensure that we have long-term plans to continually improve in this area. And if some cryptographic algorithm is not available today, our software ensures, or we have in place, the software is designed in such a manner that allows us to change the cryptographic algorithms. The next one is to implement security logging and monitoring. Now, when it comes, the problem is that if a pen tester is able to get into a system, into an application without being detected, this means that there is insufficient logging and monitoring in place for that application. And for many years, this has been actually being part of operations. But the question is, are developers able to do something about this insufficient logging? And the answer for this is the security logging control, which is the security control that developers can use to log security information during the runtime operation of an application. And when it comes to this, there are 6 types of detection points, which are good attack identifiers. And these are authorization and authentication failures, client-side input validation bypasses, and whitelist input validation failures, obvious code injection attacks, like, for example, common SQL injection strings or cross-site scripting strings, and the high rate of function use. For example, you have a high number of page requests done in a very short period of time. Now let's go a little bit more in detail for each of these 6, for some of these, to give as an example, to see what exactly we mean to add logging. Now, when it comes, for example, these are examples of intrusion detection points. So if your application receives GET, despite of the fact that it's expecting POST, then that means that somebody has intentionally intercepted that, change it intentionally from POST to GET. And this is a type of anomaly of an event that should be logged in your application. So this is something that developers can check, validate for it. And then if they see an anomaly, then that anomaly should be logged. Again, in the case of authentication exceptions, for example, the user submits POST, And the application was expecting two variables, the username and password. However, the application is receiving only one because the username, because the password has been removed. So this is another example where somebody has intentionally intercepted that and intentionally removed one of the variables. And this type of anomaly should be logged. Or again, a common thing for a pen tester is to actually add extra variables during authentication. A very good example is admin equal true. So that's another example that should be logged. In the case of input exceptions, for example, your software has a client-side validation, but on the server side, the validation fails. So a good example for this, on the client side, we have a form, and the form has a maximum length attribute. And this maximum length, but the string that actually reaches the server side is greater than the maximum length attribute set in the client. So this is a good example that somebody has intentionally changed that and should be logged. And again, when there is an input validation failure on the server side for non-editable parameters, like for example, hidden fields, checkboxes, radio buttons. And you can have more of these onto OWASP App Sensor project. So if we are to do a recap of a secure logging design, we should use the intrusion detection points as per our App Sensor project to log our information, but we should encode and validate any dangerous characters before actually we add that information to the logs in order to prevent log injection or log forging attacks. It's also important to not log sensitive information, like, for example, passwords, credit cards. When it comes to the logs, we should protect the integrity of the logs. And also, very important is once we actually have all this information stored in the logs, all of these logs should be centralized and processed in a centralized manner to ensure that we actually do something with that information that is logged to prevent attacks. Another big problem that we have at the moment is the fact that attackers come into the system and they remain undetected for months, years. Marriott breach was a very good example of that one. So we need to ensure that this information that is stored is logged into our logs, then is processed in a centralized manner, and we provide alerts from those logs in order to actually be effective in detecting intrusion. And if you want to read more about it, here we have a little more OWASP cheat sheets about how you can implement this. And the last control is about handling errors and exceptions. When it comes to errors, we should manage the error exceptions in a centralized manner and avoid to duplicate the try-catch blocks in the code. It's also important that the error messages displayed to the users do not leak critical information, but they are verbose enough to explain to the user what the issue is and allow them to further continue their journey. And this was the last control. Thank you very much for listening. Are there any questions?
Hey Katie, that was a great presentation.
Hi, Katie. It was very nice presentation. Now, I'm just checking the questions if there are any in the chat box. We do not have any questions at the moment in the chat box, but I'll keep a check on the chat box. Meanwhile, we will move on to someone who will be presenting on SIEM, vendor neutrality. Oh, I have a question now. Where WAF can help here? So, someone to know where WAF can help here in the proactive controls.
Yeah, this is a project for developers, and it contains the controls the developer can introduce while writing the software. So it's about secure coding, security techniques that developers can use while writing the code. The OAuth is not part, unfortunately, of the secure coding, so it's not part of the OWASP proactive controls.
All right, yes. Got it. So there's one more question. He's typing right now. So while we get more questions on it, Katie, we'll move on to Saman.
Yes.
We will be speaking on SIM, which is Security Information and Event Management, vendor neutrality. So over to you, Saman, and you can share your screen with us.
Thanks a lot, Vandana and Katie. That was a great presentation. Yeah, so for the formal introductions, hi everyone. I am Saman Fatima, and past 2 years I've been part of the security domain, and primarily I work on the SailPoint technology as well. I'm working on the SIM technology as well. So moving on with the presentation, just give me a moment, I'll share my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So what exactly is SIM? Like in most day-to-day activities, we have heard a lot about the SIM technology, people more and more grabbing into this technology. So to go on to the abbreviation, SIM, that is Security, Information and Event Management. SIM is nothing like, we have three terms into action, that is SIM, SIM and SEM, which usually are used interchangeably. So SIM is nothing but a practice of collecting, monitoring and analyzing security related data from computer logs. And what is this SIEM, that is a Security Event Manager, is a process of identifying and reporting security related events in a software or any other IT environment. So SIM is nothing, that is Security Information and Event Management, is nothing but is a term for software and product services, like any attack, anything, because nowadays every organization has a very huge and very noisy data, too much data. So from there to trigger out the logs, what all things you have been attacked by is difficult. So SIM technologies are most into action. Now we come on to the big three points which encapsulate SIM. So that's compliance, security, and operation. So what do we usually get into these terms? compliance, like in any organization, at the time of audit, you can generate compliance report for specific amount of people or number of people, because it helps in logging and reporting. So that's the main feature of SIEM, that's logging and reporting. So at the time of audits, this can be really, really useful. Next, we come to security. In a particular organization, we have notification and critical alerts coming from a lot of areas. That is, like, we get critical alerts from firewalls, from the IDS, IPS, from the antivirus consoles, and especially from the servers like the Active Directory servers, which we use in day to day. So it all generates a ton of critical alerts every day. So with this technology, that is SIEM technology, you can collect this all in one place and then report it in a very centralized system, and then generate notification, and then things can be taken forward. So it's just centralizing all these tons of alerts, and then generating notifications as per the alerts. Like, if just the alerts needs to be logged, or the alerts need to be reviewed as a report later, or it needs critical attention right then and there. Next, we come to operations. What happens here in SIEM, that we collect a lot of data, day-to-day data, which I mentioned, that alerts can be generated from everywhere, from firewalls, from IDS, IPS, anywhere. So these data needs to, on these data, you need to operate likewise, because you do not want any unmeaningful data to process on, so that something meaningful alert is left behind. So here we do correlation and analysis of all the raw events which we collect from our entire network. Basically, in any organization, there are mostly number of rules required on all data, that we process those rules, and based on that basis, we generate a number of alerts which we get day to day in our organization. So by these operations, we are correlating those raw data from our entire network using some rules, and then we are triggering incidents and then passing on the notifications to the required team to cater that. So this is the big three of this SIEM technology. Next, what is the basic workflow of SIEM? Like I told you, all the data which is generated from your entire network is collected. Then from there, you apply certain rules on all those events, or all those data, and then you extract the data which needs your attention, and just taking off the unmeaningful or raw data, and then you're just correlating those data, analyzing them into different sections, that some data needs just logging, some data needs to be reviewed later as part of reports, and some data needs critical importance, so they are sent out to the support teams and notified as in. And then the reports, the presentation, and final dashboards are created accordingly. So this is the basic workflow which any SIEM has. Next, the SIEM architecture, basically, as I told you, we have inputs of data, and then we just divide our data into event data and contextual data. Contextual data is like, we incorporate such data which has inputs regarding the geolocations, the informations from DNS servers, and especially the user details like the username, the job details, etc. And by these contexts, by adding these contexts, we get access if there is any access from foreign location, because we have added a context of geolocation data, and it suspects if there are any suspicious data transfers going over the network. And this all gives us basic outputs, and then according to that, analysis reports and dashboards are created. Okay, next we come, the mentioned 8 features are the very critical features of SIEM. So first we come to log collection. Log collection is nothing that we are collecting tons and tons of data and then we are processing over that data. That to collect logs from all sorts of heterogeneous sources, like from Windows, from Linux, Unix, all kinds of systems, and then we are just analyzing that particular logs which we are collecting from all the heterogeneous sources. Next is user activity monitoring. In a SIEM environment, we should know that what all user is performing. We have to monitor each and every event a user is performing. So we want a complete audit trail of what all a user is performing, and we have to monitor that if any user is performing any suspicious activity or any suspicious activity is presumed or is done to be done by a user. Next is real-time event correlation. Real-time event correlation is nothing but proactively dealing with the threats. Here, as I mentioned, correlation, like we are applying rules and analyzing those events, plus every environment, every IT system has some predefined set of rules, but still we go on with customized rules as well, because with every rule we just get one defined error, but we need to get ourselves ready for some surprising errors, some surprising detections as well. So rules should be updated as per time so that we are well secured. Next is log retention. Log retention is nothing but creating a centralized repository where we are just archiving all our log data so that that can be used in future for compliance and forensic purposes. Next is IT compliance reports. IT compliance is the core of every SIEM solution, and it just has the capability to customize and build new compliance reports as per the needs. The next is very important, that is file integrity monitoring. Every environment has certain critical files and folders which needs to be taken care of. So we need to just monitor those activity as well, that which critical file or folder is getting accessed by any user. Or we need to check that if that particular user is actually authorized to use that particular file or folder or not. And if such activities are detected, that should be taken into action, and monitoring needs to be done on every critical files and folders as well. Log forensics is it allows user to track any intruder, any outside person who is trying to use the log search capability. So that needs to be taken care of. So that is a feature of SIEM, that is log forensics. And last and the most important one is dashboards. Dashboards really help the administrators, particularly the IT administrators, to take timely actions, because if certain incidents are triggered for certain errors, dashboards and on the dashboards, that particular user should receive the notification as soon as possible so that actions could be taken. So security data must be presented in a very intuitive manner, and it should be really user friendly for the user to easily get ready for those things to tackle them. So this is all the 8 features of SIEM. Next we come. Okay. So like I was talking about all these features of the SIEM. So what all products we have in market which can be used in our systems to better tackle those data and just save us from all the intruders and any outside attacks which can make our environment bad. So like usual, we have licensed versions and we have some open source as well. So in licensed version, I have just mentioned few of them. Like IBM QRadar is a SIM tool. It's very famous. We have HP ArcSight and Splunk. So these are the very flourishing tool and many more out of them. And the open source, we have like the MozDef, which is by Mozilla itself. So they are the very flourishing products in market for SIM technology. Here I've mentioned few screenshots of the famous tools. The first one is for Splunk. I've just shown the dashboard for the same. And the second for IBM QRadar, and then is the Mozilla Def. The above two ones are the licensed versions, and the last one is the open source. Here you can see the dashboard. They are incorporating the events, the logs, everything which is to be tracked. Like for example, it's a very basic example. Like first check which you have to make with any SIM tool is nothing but authentication checks. You have to see if a person has logged in twice or thrice and his or her password failure has happened. So that's the basic thing which has to be done with SIM, the authentication checks. And because of that, many breaches are possible because someone is trying to hack into your system or anything. So such bars, such graphs and all, and colors may represent what all is happening with your system. Now, with every technology, you come up with the pros and cons. So each technology has its advantages, but it carries its own disadvantages. First, we'll talk about the advantages. Obviously, you know that SIM has its own real-time monitoring. It just checks you 24/7, 365, and it just takes up all that data, processes it, correlates it, and triggers it into incidents and notifies us on the dashboards. So the real-time monitoring is perfect. It's cost saving. The compliance part is perfect because at the time of audits, you can log your own reports for the compliance purposes, the reporting part on your dashboards, everything. But it lacks some features, that is lack of planning. So it needs to be planned and triggered very nicely into your environment to flourish. Faulty deployment strategies, like at the time of deploying any of the SIM tool, if you inculcate a lot of data, too much data, it becomes really noisy because you have fed it in too much data that cannot be taken up by the tool. So that is a faulty part. Lack of management oversight. It needs a lot of management because the data quantity is more, and you have to divide that data into meaningful data, and you have to just declutter the raw data which you do not need, which don't need your attention, and you just need to put up only that data which needs red alert, like it's the critical part, and you have to really pay attention to that. And as I mentioned, if you have too much data into the network, it becomes too noisy for the tool to work upon. So there comes tons and tons of data from the firewalls, IDS, IPS. So you have to just take up that data in slots so that can be analyzed easily. Now, with that, SIM comes to an end. I mean, I'm just wrapping up with the SIM part, but I wanted to mention that with SIM technology or tool, you need to be very much thorough with this thing, that events come up, all types of events from the firewalls, the IDS, IPS, your Active Directory servers, and then you apply certain rules on them to analyze that data, so that you just pick up the meaningful data and you write. Every organization has predefined set of rules, plus you write some customized rule for more critical alerts to be taken care of. And then these rules, when they apply on those events or that all data which you take into, they are triggered into incidents, and that incident, at their priority levels, they just put out notifications to the relevant support teams so that that can be easily handled. So on events you apply rules, and rules trigger incidents, and incidents give out notifications to the required people so that that can be easily handled. So coming to vendor neutrality. So what is vendor neutrality basically? That you're not specifying just one vendor to control your definition revision, but you're just generalizing that. You're not becoming specific with one vendor, but you're just neutral about everyone. And nowadays, the current data centers are more towards this vendor neutrality than to vendor specific. So here we'll just differentiate what do we mean by vendor neutral and what do we mean by vendor specific. What happens in vendor neutral? Technologies and tools and everything comes from different sources. They come from heterogeneous sources, so that counts under being neutral about all the technologies and tools. But on the other hand, in vendor specific data center, any hardware or software you're supplied with is just supplied by a single vendor and not from variety of sources. So the basic certification programs which are offered by many vendors, there also comes differentiation of vendor neutral and vendor specific. The certification programs cover the subject matter body more broadly, like we go more deeper into variety of sources. But on the other hand, in vendor specific certification, it just covers a particular technology in a deeper depth. It's just one technology, one vendor's technology in very vast amount of area. But as compared to vendor neutral certification, that covers every variety of sources coming from every end. So this comes a question that we have a lot of certifications covered in the vendor neutral, vendor specific, or now the new one, cloud security service, but we have too many options. So the how come we know that the certification is right for our career path? How do we differentiate on that which certification to go on? So we have a lot of non-profit organizations, many institute which are really recognized on giving us certification programs on the vendor neutrality and all kinds of certification programs which can be done. And as part of these institutes or organizations, they require like submitting papers or research results, and there can be exams or anything. So that can hold you a win-win part with that particular program. So one example I can quote is CompTIA. It's the Computer Technology Industry Association, and here it provides vendor neutral professional certifications in over 120 countries. So this is very popular. Next is our SANS. The SANS Institute is a long-standing and well-recognized powerhouse. So here the practitioners, can tackle senior level certifications like we have Security Plus or Advanced Security Practitioners, etc. And the list goes on with these different institutes and organizations. For example, this CompTIA security weighs really a lot of certifications, and IBM also includes Security Plus, Apple and Dell have it. So many industries use these certification to meet the basic certification requirement, and this may lead to getting options on all areas. So to wrap up with my thing, vendor neutrality, I would just align to more vendor neutrality because here you get a variety of sources to work on. And with vendor specific, you're just deepening your knowledge in one vendor's technology only. But in vendor neutrality, you're just going through heterogeneous sources of technology, and you're just indulging in each and every technology as possible. So with that, I wrap up with my SIM and vendor neutrality.
Thank you, Saman, for the wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
So, now, while I check in the questions and come back to you, I will actually pass it on to Manali, who will be giving the presentation on getting started with Android security.
Thank you, Katie and Saman, for giving us such informative sessions. So, hi everyone, this side Minali Arora, and I'll be giving a session on Android application security and penetration testing. Let me share my screen. Something about myself. I am a cybersecurity professional with almost 6 years of experience. My areas of working have been application and network pen testing, bash scripting, and red teaming. I've been a part-time bug bounty hunter, and I do write blogs as well. Well, you can follow me on Twitter. Uh, so the we'll start with the Android application. So here we'll talk about the overview of Android as an operating system, then Android architecture, the security model, then we'll deep dive into penetration testing of Android application, the OWASP top 10 controls for Android testing, and some security tips for developers too. So starting with the overview of Android operating system, we start with some Android components. So there are basically 4 types of components that we'll talk about. One, activities, services, broadcast receivers, content providers. So activities, if I talk about, they represent the UI or the login screen. So what we see in the what we see in the screen of the device is actually an activity. Services are whatever runs in the background of the application. Broadcast receivers are basically those that broadcast message between the application and the Android operating system. And content providers are those that provide or share data between the applications. So they handle the data and the database management issues. IPC is inter-process communication. So this describes the mechanism, how different Android components, they communicate with each other. So the communication is mainly done by messages, which are known as intents. Intents, if I talk about, so there are mainly three. So the messages shared between applications, they are actually known as intents. So the 3 types of intents is, when an activity is supposed to be started, then a message is sent to start activity. In case if a service needs to be started, then a message is sent to start service method. And in case if a broadcast needs to be delivered, then a message or an intent is sent to send broadcast method. So then we have application configuration. Application configuration is every Android application should definitely declare, how it is supposed to be configured. It should declare its intent filters. Intent filters, they actually define the kind of request that probably an Android component should respond to. Sandboxing, if we talk about, is another very important feature of Android operating system. So it's actually a Linux user-based protection to identify and isolate the app resources. So every Android application is actually isolated from another Android application. So this is again one of the security feature that Linux offers. In order to do this, Android actually assigns a unique user ID to every Android application and runs in its own process. We'll discuss about it later as well. Then permissions, if I talk about, this is also important. Every Android application should define how, what are the permissions that probably it should have. Android architecture, well, at the bottom we have Linux kernel. This consists of all the hardware components, and it has the hardware drivers like the camera, keypad, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. Then we have the Android libraries. So these are the Java-based libraries that are specific to Android development. We have Android runtime, in which we have core libraries in Dalvik Virtual Machine. So Dalvik Virtual Machine is a kind of Java runtime environment that is specific for Android application. Then we have application framework, in which we again have the content providers and services activities which we've already talked about. And then we have application installed on the top. Android security model mainly consists of two parts. One is UID separation and sandboxing. We've already discussed about what sandboxing is. And in sandboxing, every application is actually assigned a particular user ID so that it can run in its own process. So that is UID separation. Android components. So majorly we are going to talk about activities, services, broadcast receivers, and content providers in this training session. So, well, an Android application is actually a zipped file if I talk about. So, if you unzip it, then you basically have all these components inside an application, inside an Android application. So, first is Android manifest.xml. This is definitely a very important component of an Android of an APK file. So Android manifest.xml, it defines all the permissions that are set in an Android application, or the kinds of activities it will have, the application package name and everything. Classes.dex. So dex is a very important file. So let me explain you what a dex file actually is. So we have a raw Java code. When we compile it, it gives us a bytecode, which actually it's a class file, dot class. Now, when that bytecode is integrated with some other bytecode, then it gives us a Dalvik executable file. So this Dalvik executable file, along with Android manifest.xml and other resources, gives us an APK file. So this is how probably an APK file should look like to us. Well, I can even demonstrate it right away. I have this vulnerable application with me. So if I extract it here, then I will get all the contents inside an Android application. So these are the components. So this Android manifest.xml, this is the classes.dex file, and these are the other components. So if I open it here, then I will not be able to read anything, right? We'll see how we can decode this file further. So if I talk about, I can set up the environment in order to pen test an application. So first we need to have a rooted device. If in case we are testing the application from a phone, then they make sure that our phone is rooted. And if in case we are testing it from the emulator, then so I would be using Genymotion as an emulator here. Then we need to set the unknown sources. So by default, our phone does not allow any application to be installed from any unknown source apart from Google Play Store. So we need to set this setting in our phone, then install the application, and then connect the device or the emulator, whatsoever you are using, to a verb proxy setup. So now I'll start with how we can actually start testing an Android application. So basically, the security testing of Android application can be divided into two categories. One is static testing, another is dynamic testing. So static testing, it actually includes how an Android application can be reversed. So we reverse the Android application, we read the code, and dynamic testing on the other side includes analyzing the network traffic. So why actually security testing for a mobile application is important is because if we talk about web applications, then definitely, the application logic or, data is temporarily stored in the web server. But in case if we talk about mobile applications, then definitely the device that we use, it contains the application logic and it even temporarily stores the data as well. So it becomes very mandatory for us to, security test an Android application before using it. So coming on to static testing for an Android application, the tools that probably we are going to use here would be APK2. So there are a lot many tools which probably we can use for, reverse engineering. APK tool, Dex2jar, then JDGUI. So so there are many tools that probably we use for reverse engineering. We'll go ahead one by one. So Android SD. So starting with Android SDK, it's a software development kit that contains certain API libraries and developer tools to build, test, and debug Android apps. In our context, we would be talking about some other tools like ADB, APK tool, and definitely the emulator. Android Debug Bridge is the command line tool that actually is used to enhance communication between the emulator or the connected device that we have in case we install the application in an emulator. I will show you right now. Another is the APK tool that we would be going ahead using it here. So here I'm using API as a framework. I would tell you about this. So this is a mobile testing platform which has all the tools integrated inside it. So right now I am on desktop and I would be decoding my APK file. So since I told you, that when I opened this manifest file.xml in Notepad, then I was not able to view it. So what I need to do is that I need to decode this file here and the tool will decode this APK file and will extract all its contents and will create another folder on the desktop. So as you can see that it is decoding all the files. Well, I feel that it's taking a little longer. Okay, so it's done. So yeah, now if I open this file in Notepad++, so I have decoded this file and I can read it here. So now if we look on this file, then this is the package name. Then these are the permissions that this Android application has set. These are the activities that probably the application uses. So manifest file in itself describes a lot of information here. So one of the vulnerable, permission that is set is write external storage. So this is, vulnerable, and an Android application should not use a write permission on the external storage of the device. So similarly, Dex to jar is actually used to convert the Dex file that an Android application has into a jar file, and then that jar file can be actually viewed in the JD GUI, as you can see here, and we can analyze the entire code. So I already did it for you. So yeah, so I mean, these are the class files. So if you look at here, these are the class files that probably the application possesses, and we can read the entire code. So if you see here, then see, I mean, this is the super secret key 123. So since this is a vulnerable APK file that I'm using, so we can see that it has stored a key value. So we need to analyze the entire code. We need to see if the application is storing any sensitive data in itself, or any kind of password or pin numbers, or any cryptographic key, or so we need to check this code and analyze. Then after that, manifest.xml, we've talked about it. Then yeah, so apart from this, we if we talk about the dynamic testing arsenals, then we have browser, we have worksuite that can be used as a proxy tool in order to intercept the request between the application and the server. Droidbox, MobSF. So there are many tools that are available for performing dynamic testing of an Android application. So Drozer is, I would say, one of my favorite tools that probably I always use for testing an Android application. So I'll give a hands on. So yeah, so in order to start Drozer, we first need to connect to the emulator and click on the Drozer agent and start the server on. After that, we need to, so Drozer by default uses port 31415. Okay, well, my bad. So the command that we basically use in order to connect to the browser server on 31415 is adb forward. Yeah. So we've connected to the server. We've started the browser agent as well on our emulator. Then we type here yeah. So we've connected to the browser console. If I type here list, this shall give me all the packages, or sorry, all the commands that probably browser uses, right? So Drozer can give us information about activities in an application. It can give us information about services that an application uses. It can give us a lot of information. So we'll see how we are going to utilize Drozer. So we use these commands by using the run keyword, and then I'm going to pick the commands from here. Okay. So here I give, so this was the folder name. Okay. So now the application insecure bank uses the package com.android.insecurebank.v2, which could be even seen from the Android manifest.xml file as well. Okay. So in my further commands, I'm going to use this package name only. Now so I've got the package name. Now after this, I need certain information about the package. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use the command app.package.info -a as a switch, then com.android this would be the package name. Okay. You can see that it has given me a lot information about the permissions that it is using. The APK path would be the path where the application is installed in my emulator. The data directory, the process name, version, the UID that probably application is assigned in the emulator, and the shared libraries, user ID, which are probably null. Now further, now after this, after we've got certain information about the application package, now we are going to check our attack surface, as in we are going to see what activities content providers or broadcast receivers are exported by the application. Exported means, when I say the word exported, it means that those components, be it services or content providers, they are available by other applications to use. So I would go ahead, run app.package dot attack surface, then I will give the package name. Okay, so you can see that this application exports 5 activities, 1 broadcast receiver and 1 content provider. Now exported activities are 5, which means that 5 activities of this application can probably be used by other applications installed in the same device. Now let's gather some information about what are these activities that are exported, and if these activities, exported activities, can be of any use to an attacker. So I'll use run app.activity.info -a, and then I'm going to give the package name. Okay, so we can see that these are the activities that are exported. Login activity, post login, do transfer, view statement, or change password. Well, these activities are critical ones, and definitely they can be of a good use for an attacker. So let's check what view statement activity is. So what I'll do is that this is my emulator and I'm not connected. I haven't logged into the application, right? I will start this activity. I will view this activity without logging in. So I'll give the package name. And then I'll give the activity name, which I probably want to start. So I want to start the view statement. Okay, so I open the emulator and I can view this activity, view statement of the application without logging in. Similarly, if I want to change the activity and view change password, now I can see the change password page. I can type in the username here. I can give the new password directly, and this is how I can change the password of the user. Well, this contains a flaw that I as a security professional, we always recommend that, a change password page should always ask for the old password as well. Well, this does not ask, so this is again a flaw. But yeah, I mean, this is how we can access the post login activities of the application without actually logging into the application. So the way we have exported activities, we have exported broadcast receivers, we can extract information about the content providers too. The Drozer, in my opinion, it is one of my favorite tools, and I always use it for pen testing an Android application. Well, coming back to the presentation, yeah. So after Drozer, yeah. So if we want to, intercept the application traffic, we definitely use Burp. So in Burp, so in the emulator that we use or the device, you go to the Wi-Fi settings, you manually change it, and you give the proxy host name and the proxy port on which you want to intercept the traffic, and there you can directly intercept the traffic on the Burp proxy. Okay, so most common vulnerabilities that, in my experience, I have always found during application testing are OTP bypass, authentication bypass, that generally happens in Android applications. Then definitely insecure direct object reference is always my favorite. Then information leakage, definitely it has, and privilege escalation also, where you can escalate privileges from a normal user to a higher privileged user like admin or super admin. So these are the common vulnerabilities that Android applications are mostly vulnerable to. But never forget the OWASP top 10 if I talk about. So OWASP is also given its top 10 for mobile application security. Number one is improper platform usage, then insecure data storage, insecure communication, insecure authentication, insufficient cryptography, insecure authorization, client code quality, code tampering, reverse engineering, and some extraneous functionality, which actually includes any functionality of an Android application that is not available in the production environment, but somehow can be accessed by the attackers. So, well, the details can be definitely found on the website of OWASP. Then, well, let's not forget the developers. We have some Android security tips that, I would definitely like to give to the developers. So some of the general ones are, store data safely, and always enforce secure communication. Use TLS for communication. Then provide the right permissions to application. Then only sensitive data should be shared to cache files. All the security providers and components should be updated so that, they are not vulnerable to any publicly available exploits. Then shared preferences should always be used in private mode. So for other security tips, they are available on developer.android.com. So I would always suggest to, developers to make secure applications. So yeah, well, that's the end of the presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much for the presentation, Minali. It was really great. Especially the last slide. I really like it.
Yeah, thank you.
Let me look at the chat section for questions for you. There was one question which was answered by someone. So let me see if there are any more questions. I think we don't have any questions, but someone says, very helpful presentations. Thank you. So thanks to all three of you. The presentations were amazing. I will be sharing the recording shortly with the whole audience alongside the presentation. I'll be uploading it on the SlideShare and will be sharing with all of you. Thank you so much for joining, and we look forward to the future sessions. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.